Let's go ahead and open with prayer. God and Father, you are so good. Lord, and we bless you. Lord, I thank you for what you have to say to us. I just pray that you would open the eyes of our hearts to hear the wonders of your word. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, I thought it was very interesting, the theme of the singing today. I came up with this, without even talking to TJ, and it's just amazing how much correlation there is. I heard a story once about a pastor who obviously planned the sermons, and his wife led the singing. And they, sometimes coordinated, sometimes, most of the time didn't. And so his sermon was about, not drinking. And he says they took all the bottles and took them to the river and threw them in the river. And then they took all their whiskey bottles, took them to the river, threw them in the river. Took all their wine bottles, took them down the river, threw them in the river. And then the closing song was, "Shall we gather at the river?" I love it. But we do see throughout Genesis tension. Tension between people and people. We've seen tension between people and God. And a lot of this is a continuing struggle for a father's love. I'm so thankful that we don't have to struggle for God's love. And as we were singing this morning, it's freely given. A lot of the struggling results from people pursuing an agenda. And their agenda may seem, it may make a whole lot of sense from the human viewpoint. The agenda may be based on some ambition or desire that somebody wants to see fulfilled or wants to accomplish. But we see these agendas often come in conflict, especially when they are not consistent with God's agenda. We talked about these tensions and these rivalries. We've seen from the beginning these rivalries occurring. Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Leah and Rachel, now Joseph and his brothers. Okay. Each having an agenda, conflicting agendas. And we've seen that this led to envy, to murder, to expulsion out of the family, to deceit, all kinds of things. When looking at the sons of Jacob, we find that heirs have been disqualified. In biblical times, the firstborn was very important. They were the ones who were going to carry on the family traditions, the family values. It's called the Behor. The Behor got a double portion of the inheritance. And Reuben should have been in that position, but he was disqualified because he slept with Jacob's concubine Bilhah. Simeon and Levi were disqualified because they totally wiped out a town. They killed all the men in the town of Shechem because the prince of Shechem raped their sister Dinah. And so they did this as an act of revenge, but it was a bloody act of revenge, and therefore they were disqualified. This leaves Judah as the next person in line to inherit the birthright, or to become the Behor. However, we see that Jacob favored Joseph. And in this struggle, it pits Judah and Joseph against each other as the favored son, as the Behor, as the oldest. And the choice of who will become the Behor is not resolved until the end of Genesis. And it actually has implications throughout biblical history, as Judah was the southern tribe, and the sons of Joseph, Ephraim, was the name of the northern tribe. So generations appear as a key word, a key theme throughout Genesis, and this account begins with recalling the generations. I'm using the Young's literal translation here. It's a bit flowery, kind of old wordish, but it preserves a lot of key words that other translations change. But you would think that the narrative of Jacob, the generations of Jacob, would begin with Reuben, Simeon, Levi, with all the sons, and go through all the sons. And it's very peculiar because it doesn't do that. The generations of Jacob begins with Joseph at 17. And he was he was tending the sheep of the flocks with some of his brothers. And he's a bit of a tattletale. He comes back with an evil account of the brothers. Now, does Jacob know that this is going on? Does he need this information? Or, is Joseph just kind of being the young whippersnapper, and he was quite a bit younger than his brothers, and giving an evil report? We know that Jacob, and here he's referred to as Israel, loved Joseph more than any of his sons. And it's interesting because it says he was a son of his old age. Now, Jacob was about 90 when Joseph was born. But I think this means more than that. I think son of his old age gives us a clue as to why Jacob loved Joseph more than his sons. And of course, one thing that has to do with is he's the son of the wife that he loved. He wanted to marry Rachel. He worked 7 years to marry Rachel. He loved Rachel. He really didn't want Leah. Leah was kind of forced on him. And so Leah was kind of secondary, and subsequently Leah's sons were kind of secondary. They're almost kind of ancillary. The tradition says that Jacob kind of saw himself in Joseph, whether he had physical features that looked like Joseph or actions that were like Joseph. He was in a similar situation as Joseph, as being a younger son and not in line to the birthright. And we can see this in our lives when you see, like father, like son. We see, several times it's a splitting image of a father and son. So this might have been something that was going on also. Okay. But this would lead Jacob to see in Joseph, to see himself in the next generation, to see through the life of Joseph himself bringing out his goals, fulfilling, delivering his legacy. Okay, and then we see that because of this love, Jacob gives Joseph a second tunic, and it's often referred to as the coat of many colors. Not important, but really that's not how it's translated. It's a long, long tunic. It would be something that would be given to the son who is going to get the birthright. It's long. It's not something you wear out in the field. It's not practical to wear out in the field. Okay, it's a nice kind of indicating a special person. Okay, and the brothers didn't just know that Joseph was the favorite. They saw it. So we see tension arising. The brothers see. They see over and over and over again that Joseph was the favorite. And they hate him. The word for hate is the same one that's actually used for how Esau hated Jacob. And it indicates a seething, a growing hate. And it's interesting, they can't even speak to him in peace. They hate him so much, they can't speak to him in peace. And then, to make matters worse, Joseph has this dream. And he dreams that he and his brothers are out in the field, and they're sheathing up stalks of wheat, and Joseph's wheat stalk stands up, and the 11 other wheat stalks bow down to it. And he doesn't keep this to himself. He is quick to tell his brothers about this. So now, not only is he the father's favorite, does he think he's God's favorite as well? God's giving him these dreams. And, you're thinking that we're going to bow down to you? So this added to their hatred of him. They hated him still more. Shortly after that, he dreamt another dream and told his brothers, as well as his brothers and his father. And in this dream, there was a sun and moon and 11 stars that all bowed down to him. And everybody jumped to the same conclusion of what the interpretation of that dream was. And the brothers became zealous in their hatred for him. They just, couldn't stand it. So then we also see that Jacob didn't appreciate Joseph's dream either. So you kind of wonder what Jacob was thinking when Joseph told him this story. And he said, certainly, I and my mother and my sons aren't going to bow down to you. Now, does anybody see kind of something interesting or not quite right with the sun and the moon and the stars? Father, mother, brothers. Something weird going on there. Like Rachel has already died. So why is the moon, involved in this? So you kind of have to wonder what Jacob was thinking. Is this really something revelationary that, and Jacob would probably be glad to see Joseph rise to some preeminence. But, the moon, that doesn't fit. So is this kid just making up ambitious stories? What's really going on here? The other thing is...
I might be missing something, but I don't get that. What's the moon? Why is the moon?
Father and mother. The sun was Jacob, and the moon was Rachel.
And the 11.
And the 11 stars were the 11 brothers. But Rachel had already died. And so she was not on earth to bow down to him.
Escaping me.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Because he says, how is it that I, thy mother, and thy brethren will bow down to you? His mother was not there. She had already died. Okay, so anyway, what's with this story? And his brothers, Jacob saw this zealot hatred of his brothers. He watched the matter. So he knew this was going on. And then what do we find happening? That Jacob asked Joseph to go to Shechem to check on the brothers tending the flock. What was Jacob thinking? He knew that the brothers hated Joseph. Shechem was the place where Levi and Simeon had massacred the city. So you would have to think that there's, they're not welcome in Shechem. It might be a dangerous place to be. It was a 3 days journey. Joseph was alone. Anything could have happened. But Joseph agrees. He must have known that this wasn't a very comfortable mission, but he agrees to go. Okay? And he finds his brothers aren't in Shechem, but have moved on to Dothan. Being good Alabamians. Do you know what famous prophet was from Dothan? Elisha. Mm-hmm. So now you know. Okay. So I wonder, you have to wonder, did Jacob know the agenda, that the brothers would be leaving Shechem after a while, and maybe, well, let's see if Joseph is willing to go, and he's not going to find them, so then he'll come right back. or, just what was going on in Jacob's mind here. And then we have to wonder, what really was Jacob asking? Because very interesting words are used. See the peace. Go and see the peace of your brothers and the peace of the flock. Now the brothers could not speak peacefully to him. But here, Jacob is sending him out to find peace with the brothers and peace with the flock and bring back word. They couldn't speak. Jacob wants him to bring back a word of peace. So very interesting play on words here. And you just kind of have to wonder if Jacob was wanting to see if Joseph could remedy the situation and maybe make things right with his brothers, or if he even expected that they would meet, if they would come together. So Joseph takes off, and as he gets to Dothan, tension explodes. Okay? This zealous hatred that the brothers have starts boiling up, and before Joseph can even do anything, they plan to kill him. They said, "Here comes that master of dreams." I don't know, maybe they thought he was going to come tell them another dream. Maybe they thought he was going to come and spy on them and give them a bad report back to Dad. But they weren't going to let any of this happen. They were going to get rid of him. And then we have this interesting sideline of Reuben planning espionage. Okay, he felt responsible, so he says, "Don't kill him, let's just put him in the pit and he can die." Meanwhile, Reuben is planning on sneaking back and coming and taking him out and bringing him home. Right? So they strip him of his coat, strip him of his tunic, and toss him into the pit. And it says the pit's in the wilderness. Okay? And then an interesting thing happens. They sit down and eat. If you were just planning to do something evil to somebody, could you sit down and eat? They did. So this was not on their conscience at all. They hated him so much that it might have been a celebratory meal. We got rid of him. Okay. And then they see a caravan coming. And Judah gets the idea, why just let him rot in the pit? We can make some money on this guy. And so they decide to sell him to the Ishmaelites who were coming with the caravan on their way to Egypt. Okay, so it's interesting because the words in this account parallel the words in another account in Genesis. They are pretty much the exact words and in the exact order and with the exact intent, actually. And sometimes when this happens, knowing and understanding the first account sheds a little bit of light on the second. So let's think about this. Where have we seen this before? Where somebody's asked to do something and the response is, "Here I am." The request is, "Please, go pray thee. Go please." Somebody sees the place of doom, something of doom from afar. Somebody says, "Don't touch him. Do not stretch out your hand and kill." And then somebody lifts up their eyes to see an alternative to the death.
Sacrifice life.
Right. Okay, so exactly. The same intent, the same words, the same order as in the binding of Isaac. Okay, so is this kind of and we are told that in the binding of Isaac, God put Abraham to the test. Now Jacob, he was about 15 when Abraham had died. He must have heard about this interesting phenomena that his father and grandfather went through. He knew that God was testing Abraham's loyalty, his willingness to continue a legacy. I don't know, was Jacob maybe thinking, well, let's see if Joseph is able to continue my legacy. Is he willing to do this? And we see the exact events playing out. And we saw in the binding of Isaac that Isaac was a picture of Christ. He was a picture of Messiah. Okay? And what do we see about Joseph? Okay? We see some similarities also. He was loved by his father. He was willing to go to his brothers. He was rejected by his brothers. He was stripped of his garments, put into the earth, sold for silver, the price of a slave, brought out of the earth, and then as we see next week, he became the agent for salvation for all the nations. So a little Akita kind of thing going on, a little binding of Isaac thing going on, and now we see Joseph emerging as a picture of the Messiah. I just think it's fascinating how the gospel is presented throughout the scriptures, over and over and over again. God makes it so clear. St. Augustine once said, "The Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed." You see so many pictures going on here. Okay, so then you kind of have to wonder what Jacob was expecting. Did he expect Joseph to return soon? Did he expect a report? Did he expect Joseph to find his brothers? He probably didn't expect what actually came back to him. We don't know why Reuben wasn't present and why Joseph was sold without Reuben knowing. And there's actually a second interpretation of the sale of Joseph, because in the account, the brothers make plans to sell Joseph, but the brothers isn't used when Joseph was actually sold. It says they sold him. So they see the Ishmaelites off and they plan to sell them to the Ishmaelites. And then the Midianites come, and it says they pulled him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites. So did the brothers pull Joseph out of the pit and sell him, or did the Midianites pull Joseph out of the pit and sell him without the brothers realizing that this was happening? It's just another theory, but it could explain why Reuben was not aware that Joseph was sold. Because the brothers came and found the empty pit, or Reuben might have come to get Joseph out and found the pit empty, and then ran back to his brothers and said, "He's gone. You know, what am I going to do?" And he rents his tunic. So then the brothers have this idea. They had it before. Okay, we'll kill a goat, smear blood, kill a goat, smear blood on the coat, and present it to our father. Now that's very interesting, I think, because Jacob also used a goat and a coat to deceive his father. Different way, but same things were used. So they took the coat to Jacob, and it's a very interesting word that they use. It says, "Discern, please." Discern, we pray you. Discern, please. It's a recognize, please. It's only used one other time in Scripture. Okay? And we'll get to see where that is. But recognize, please. They didn't tell Jacob what happened. They let him come to the conclusion himself. Kind of like a little white lie, right? Is this your sons? And actually, because the brothers did not accept Joseph as the Behor, as the one who should inherit the birthright, they were also asking him, look at this. This is no longer Joseph's. Discern. Discern who the real Behor is. discern who the real person is that should receive the birthright and your blessing, the double portion. Okay, so discern, please. So Jacob mourns, he can't be comforted. You have to wonder, Jacob was the one who sent Joseph out. Was he feeling a bit of guilt and remorse for his part in what happened? So then we come to an interesting interlude in chapter 38. If you skip from chapter 37, the end of chapter 37, to the beginning of chapter 39, it just kind of continues. So what is going on with chapter 38? Chapter 38 talks about Judah. And there are some interesting things that happen in this chapter that tie to what we've just been talking about, as well as tie to the future. So I want to go into it briefly with you. We saw that Joseph was taken down to Egypt. And in 38, we see that Judah goes down. Okay? And when it talks about going down, it doesn't always mean geographically going south. It means spiritually going down. So here Judah comes back. His father is mourning. There must be a lot of guilt. So what's he going to do? He's going to escape. He's not going to fess up to anything. He's going to escape, and he goes down. Okay. So he left his community. He left Hebron. You know, in our day of extreme individualism, sometimes we forget the importance of community. I think this church does a great job of remembering community, but it's easy to forget the importance of community. You know, salvation is individual, but once we're into the kingdom, we need each other. And Jacob left. Judah left his community, his support. Okay. Not only did he leave his community, but he went to Canaan and married a Canaanite. Now, way back with Noah, the three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, Ham was cursed by Noah for doing something improper sexually. And it wasn't actually Ham who got cursed, but Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan." And from that time, the descendants of the godly line were not to marry Canaanites. They were not to intermarry. So we saw, you know, Isaac had to take a wife from outside Canaan. Jacob didn't marry a Canaanite. So it's very important that a Canaanite wasn't married. But Judah kind of went down and down and down, and finally he intermarries into this forbidden family. He has 3 sons, and his oldest son, Er, becomes of marrying age. He finds a woman, Tamar, to become his wife. Okay, well, we find that Er did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord took his life. So Judah is experiencing firsthand now what it feels like to lose a son. He can kind of start relating to his father. Well, in this day, levirate marriage was practiced. And that is, if a husband dies and did not bear a child, did not bear a son, then the next son in line has to come along and become the husband with the widow. And the first son they bear will be in the name of the dead husband. So Judah is doing this. He says, okay, I'll give Onan to you, my second son. He'll become your husband. But Onan's thinking, you know, okay, when Judah dies, when my father dies, I'll get the inheritance. Now, if I bear a child with Tamar, that child becomes the oldest son's son, and he's going to get the inheritance. Okay? So there was very selfish reasons why he wouldn't want this to happen. And so he refuses to impregnate Tamar. The Lord finds this extremely bad and kills Onan. Okay, so Judah's thinking about this. He says, okay, I have 2 sons. They both married this woman, and they died. She must be bad luck. Okay, so he's not going to give his 3rd son to her. Tamar remains a widow. She dresses in widow's clothing and goes to her father's house. Shortly after, Judah's wife dies, and he keeps himself busy with the work, and he goes with his buddy to shear the sheep at Timnah. Tamar is told that he's coming, and so she dresses herself up as a temple prostitute and sits out in the open. Judah approaches her, propositions her, and she agrees. And she says, well, what will you give me for this? And he says, a kid of the goats. He said, but I don't have it right now. He says, okay, well, what will you give me as a pledge? And this word pledge is going to come up again. So Judah bargains with his staff, his seal, and his cord. Okay, the staff being the main thing for his work, his livelihood. His seal is actually his signet ring, his signature. And a cord could be a bracelet or could be a cord worn around the neck, and it identifies somebody. So Judah is giving away his identity. So he's going further down. Okay. So they have the affair. Judah leaves. Tamar ditches the prostitute garb and dresses back in her widow's clothing. Okay. About 3 months later, she begins to show. And the people of the village tell Judah about this. Hey, your daughter-in-law is pregnant. She played the prostitute, and she's pregnant. And Judah gets upset. He says, okay, she's going to die. You know, doesn't know anything about the circumstances. How many times do we kind of react to something, not knowing all the circumstances, but just seeing what it appears to be like? Okay. So then Tamar produces in front of everybody Judah's staff, his seal, and his cord. And interestingly enough, she uses that phrase that was used when they presented Jacob's coat. Recognize, please. Discern, please. So Judah had used those words for deception, and now he sees it coming back on him. Making a relationship. But Judah had a choice. He could have said, she's lying, she stole these, I don't know how she got them. He had a choice. He could have let it all go. But he decided to own up. And he got back his identity. He got back his staff, his signet ring, his cord. So he's starting to rise back up. He established himself back into the family. Tamar bore twins, Perez and Zerah. And actually Perez is part of the kingly line. It's part of the line of King David and of Jesus. Okay? So by admitting his wrong, being able to come back to the family, he establishes his kingly line. So we can find great hope in this, because God chooses those who have experienced a fall and learn how to live better through that. Those who make mistakes and learn from them, who rise up after they've fallen, after they've made the mistake. God does not choose flawless individuals. Okay, so we've seen the account from the brother's perspective, from Judah's perspective. What about from Joseph's perspective? Now, Joseph was taken away. He didn't know what his father was told. He didn't know about his coat that was stained with blood. He didn't know what happened. A lot of times, because we know the rest of the story, it's hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of some of these characters. But Joseph didn't know any of this was going on. What was he thinking? Why isn't Father coming for me? I'm the favorite. Where's the search party? Joseph didn't write home. He didn't. So what was he thinking? Well, there were several people in his family who had been expelled from the family. Ishmael, Esau. Am I being expelled? Was this all just a setup to get me out? Where do I belong? Am I even part of this family anymore? Not alone am I the Behor, the oldest. Am I even part of this family anymore? And so this is going to take us into our story next, the continuing of the story next week as we visit Joseph in Egypt and see what his role was there. So we've seen a variety of agendae being chosen, coming into play, causing tension. And we're going to continue to see those. But just as we think about what are our agendas and why we choose those, and are they consistent with where God has us and with what he wants to be accomplishing? Or does it make sense from a human view? Or does it make sense because it's something that we really want and think should happen? So we see when those kind of agendas are chosen, conflict arises. The good thing is God still works through them. So let me just have someone close in prayer, and then we can see what your thoughts are. Abby, would you like to for us?
God, thank you so much for everything that you have given to us through your word, to make things come through and to reveal your character and to reveal how you use others that are not flawless, dear God, and it gives us hope, and I thank you so much for that. And I thank you so much for Kathy's teaching that she brought revelation and insight into areas that maybe some of us did not have before. And Lord, I just ask that this would be sealed within us and that we would just carry it forward and be able to meditate on it even more. And thank you for your salvation through your Son. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay. Thoughts, questions?
Somebody go before I jump in. Okay, well, I'm going to speak. You
Jump
go,
on
Saran.
in.
You go. You go.
No, I'm turning to you.
No,
So I can
I don't want to dominate here. Anybody else? I've done a little bit of, and a little bit of research for Easter because I'm going to tie up all of Genesis, and I found a scholar who's not a theologian or biblical scholar, who, and it happens to have been a woman. Not that matters, but she made the statement that when you read through the book of Genesis, you read all of this familial dysfunction. And as soon as she said that, I thought, man, no kidding. And then you have brought it out again. You went through several. And then she makes a statement, as did you here, that and our worship did, that God's grace. I mean, that song that we sang, I don't remember all the words, but I'll tell you the way I remember it. There's no, I think of another song, I think it's a rhythm and blues song, but there's no mountain high enough, there's no valley low enough. And the whole idea of the song was that He's chasing after us. He's coming for us. He's not letting us run away. If we'll give Him a chance. He's going to pursue us. It reminds me of a great song in my youth called The Hound of Heaven. And it's about how the Holy Spirit pursues us when we're doing like Judah and we're not where we should be. But I just think in my mind of, I'm reading through Genesis, and again, I'm just struck by all the just crazy things that these folks did, But it does give us hope. I mean, none of us, the woman that I read said there are no families that are not dysfunctional. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we're all tainted by selfishness, sinfulness, even in the best of families. And we sang Oh, How He Loves Us. I can't remember, is that the title of the song, Oh, How He Loves? And I broke down over here. Every time I sing that song, I break down, because that song was emblematic for my oldest daughter. So many of you have met my oldest daughter, and she went through a period of difficulty as a university student where she struggled spiritually. And of course, I'm not going to tell you we were a perfect family. I'm sure we have plenty of dysfunction. But we've had a fairly stable and loving family unit for my daughters. And so watching my older daughter go through this was just devastating for me. She didn't think God loved her. And the only way I knew to portray that to her, it was at a critical moment, where I just, funny enough, she knew I loved her. I mean, she knew I loved her. And I used that, I leveraged that to say, sweetheart, I love you, you know that. God certainly loves you. I mean, I'm such a poor representation of God's love for you. And yet you know I love you. And that had a critical moment for her. And what's so striking for me is that, my youngest daughter didn't have any of those struggles. And my wife and I talk all the time about our kids. How anybody who's had kids, we all do. They're different. And we are not, we don't own our children's path. They make their own path, and we have to, you know what I mean? I've been in churches where if anyone has a struggle with their child, you are immediately, as the parent, it's assumed that you're not doing something right. Well, I mean, my position has always been to wave the white flag. No, I know I'm not. I know I'm not doing it all right. God loves us, and I think this whole story of Genesis and the songs we sang tied it all. God pursues us. He loves us. He does not expect us to be perfect. He knows we're not perfect. And I think the Old Testament is such a great example to show us that God won't give up on us. He will pursue us. All He wants is that we not turn our back on Him. And of course, as soon as I say that, I think of Lot's wife. Because I wasn't here when you gave that teaching, but I did a teaching on that years ago where I basically said, look, Lot's wife didn't just have a moment of indecision and she was turned into a pillar of salt. The angels told them, leave and do not look back. And she didn't just, because I was taught as a kid in Sunday school that she looked back. And instantly turned into a, no, she turned her back and went back. She's walking back to where God told them, don't stay here. You know what I mean? So she turned her back on God at that moment. So as long as we don't do that, we serve a God of amazing love and mercy and grace. And that's, you know, why I broke down over here during that song, because I was thinking about the impact of my own child. And I just think it's amazing. All these stories are amazing to me. And like Abby prayed, it gives us all hope. Because none of us, come on. You know, I've been in churches where you're supposed to be holy. And everybody was holy. Well, the truth is, none of us are holy. Except in Him.
Holy in a different way.
Yeah.
Full of holes.
Something that, you know, I thought about or I've been rolling around in my mind is, and it's something I haven't really ever thought about until today, about how Joseph was going to his brothers and his father, telling him about his dreams. I mean, you know, he could have been a little boastful, a little snotty, and you know, a little, you know, I've gotten this vision, so to speak, but then when I was thinking about, you know, when you were going over the fact that his brothers decided to sell him, I was like, you know what? Again, no weapon formed against me will prosper. You know, no weapon. God was going to be glorified through Joseph, because that was God's plan, was to be glorified through Joseph. And even through his pious, boastful pridefulness and his brother's evil hatefulness, God still utilized his life to prosper and to bring his glory. And that's what, so I was trying to figure out how to do that. It sounded better in my head. I don't know if it sounded good when I said it, y'all. But it sounded good in my head.
Yeah, and I wonder if God's perfect plan would have been much different.
Yes.
But because of
That's
people's
That's right.
pride, envy, hate, it kind of messed it up. But God still brought it through.
Mm-hmm.
It still works.
And He does that even today, you know, when, you know, I think back over things that have happened in my life and where I know I should have done things differently. But then God has utilized even those mistakes and those errors in our life.
That's exactly right.
And I'm like, man, had I just not gotten off on that path and just done what God wanted to do to begin with, how much time would have been saved and how much garbage would I not have to deal with over here.
And that's exactly right. The perfect plan, we don't experience it. There would be one. But thank God that He works His plan.
And He gives us grace, man.
Yeah.
Very enlightening. I would love to hear you teach, because you're very enlightening. Not that I don't like you too.
Sibling rivalry here? I think that's the other thing when you were teaching is I just thought of how much sibling rivalry impacts our lives, you know. I think in my mind about families, you know, when they had back 100 years ago, people had 10, 12 children. And I just know, you know, my mother's side was a very good family. My father's side was a very dysfunctional family. But the baby was privileged on my mother's side, and it caused a lot of bad sibling rivalry among men and women who are good people. To this day, they're good people, but they had problems because the youngest child, and I think that happens a lot in bigger, you know, the more kids you have. By the time the parents have the 10th or, you know, the 6th or 8th child, they're more like grandparents. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And they're more likely to spoil that last child, and then the older students almost said, the older children are like, what the heck is going on? I would have never gotten away with that, you know.
My kids tell me that all the time. But listening to you also talk about your older daughter, I think even in our society today, that there's some implication on that firstborn that subconsciously we interject, because I can remember when Margot was about 16, 17 years old, she went through a transition in her life, and of course it was because of our dysfunctional family that she was. So, that was her excuse, and her, and I was like, well, there is no family perfect, but she would compare our family and our dynamics to other people that she knew, and
To what she saw.
Yeah, what she saw. And I said, there is no family, I don't care how perfect they look from the outside,
That's right.
that is not dysfunctional. I said, I can assure you of that. I said, read the Bible. There's so much dysfunction going on that I said, it's been going on since the beginning of time. But I do think that subconsciously we do, as a society, put forth some type of birthright or birth, on that firstborn child that seems to give them a lot more pressure. Because I think my brother felt that too. I mean, expectations that you don't expect. It's not that you don't expect from your subsequential children. That was a tough word for me right then. I don't even want to. But I think that the firstborn has a lot of pressure that they don't. And then, yes, the youngest one, and tell me all the time, Jacob is...
A friend of mine once described children as waffles. The first one is the practice one.
Oh,
Yes, it is.
You really don't know what you're doing.
The first waffle's never right.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Well,
interesting.
and that Love's commercial, I don't, that whoever, come up with the concept for that Love's diaper commercial, your firstborn kid, everybody has to come in a hazmat suit to see their first child. By the third kid, they're picking up, they're picking it up out of an oil spill, eating whatever, you just don't care, but I think you mature over, those children too. I mean, it's not that you don't care. You realize that there are certain things that are not going to, people don't have to be in a hazmat suit to hold your child. Right. There's so many things that you want to be as a perfect child, a parent, and I think even at an infancy, they perceive that, and they take that on as a, I don't know.
How many times have we heard, you're the oldest, you should know better?
Yes.
I grew up, I'm not the oldest, I'm a middle child, but yeah.
That's a whole nother. Yes, Morgan, there's a whole
I've heard
nother.
that, a lot of parents say, you should know better, you're the oldest.
Yep.
They're looking up to you, you should know better.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure that we place on the oldest sibling.
That's right.
But I never, I've got 2 other siblings, and like Barbara, my sister's the middle. And 50 years later, I find out that she's incredibly jealous of the fact that in her mind, I'm the favorite. Where I never felt like I was the favorite, because I could never live up to my father's standards and what my mother had expectations for me. And I always felt that she was kind of the golden child. Now, my brother was 6-7 years younger than me, so I don't know, it's just somebody who existed, but I didn't. But I mean, I never felt like that. And then to see it bubble out, 50 years later, to me.
And no, the sibling stuff is
I don't know
huge.
how to and it's not handled. We had to just get away from it, and we pray for them, and there's nothing you can do. That's hard. Everybody, but we're all selfish, self-centered.
That's right.
Very enlightening message.
Thanks. But I will say too, just to extend that to the church and rivalry within the church is kind of like sibling
Mm-hmm.
rivalry.
That's right.
Well, I was here first.
Yeah, right.
Well, we had visited a church, and when we went to the church, and the church was an old church, and they were redoing downstairs where they were putting the youth in the basement. But it had severe case of asbestos and all that other bad stuff that was down there, so they had to tear it all out. At that time, there was about 60, 70 kids coming on Wednesday night that really weren't from the church. And the Wednesday night was a crowd of about 6 to 15. And we were sitting there, and they were so upset that the youth were in the sanctuary that they didn't pay for it. They had no right to it.
Wow.
And I was like, are you kidding me? So now you wonder why they don't want to come to church? And it's all about, what your right is above their right. And like, I thought Jesus loved the children. What happened with that one? But yeah, I mean, to be so stagnant and ill-willed, how do you change? I mean, you can be changed, but you didn't get there overnight. You spent 50 years becoming.
Getting there.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah. So again, I just want to reiterate how much DJ and I appreciate you all. The community and the fact that we don't have to rival anyone.
We appreciate y'all.